Before I begin, is there anyone who is not ready? No? Okay, and starting. The United States Supreme Court should strike down the death penalty in the United States on the grounds that it violates the Eighth Amendment prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. The Supreme Court is necessary to abolish the death penalty. They should declare unconstitutional on Eighth Amendment grounds. Williams, 2017. If the death penalty is to be abolished in the U.S., that will have to be done by the U.S. Supreme Court. Breyer laid out the roadmap for declaring the death penalty unconstitutional. 3 fundamental defects make the death penalty cruel and unusual punishment, and therefore a violation of the Eighth Amendment. The first serious defect is the serious unreliability of the death penalty. The likelihood that some innocent individuals were wrongly executed. There is significantly more research-based evidence indicating that court sentence to death individuals who may be actually innocent. The second serious defect is its arbitrariness. It would be unconstitutional if inflicted in an arbitrary and capricious manner. It is usually not the irregularness of the crime, but rather the factors which case defendants to be sentenced to death. Race of both the defendant and the victim, gender of the defendant, the place where the crime was committed, the lack of resources available to the defense counsel, quality of the defendant's legal representation, and the political pressure on the judges who must stand for re-election. The third defect is its unconscionably long delays that undermine the death penalty's penological purpose. Lengthy delays undermine both the deterrence and retributive rationales of the death penalty. A penalty that serves no purpose and no useful purpose and is therefore cruel. The decision should not be left to the states. The Supreme Court should deal the death penalty its final blow. New York Times, 2017. The rest of the developed world agreed to reject the cruel and unusual practice long ago. How can it be ended here for good? Leaving it up to individual states is not the solution. The death penalty holds out and are fiercely committed, and they won't stop killing people unless they're forced to. Relying on the vague idea of attrition absolves the court's responsibility to the ultimate arbiter, the guardian of the Constitution, and specifically the Eighth Amendment. The court has already relied on provisions to ban the execution of juvenile offenders and the intellectually disabled and those convicted of crimes other than murder. There's no reason to not take that final step to end the death penalty for good. U.S. Supreme Court action is modeled internationally and serves as the foundation for international human rights law. Kretizinski, 2009. Barak, the Supreme Court of Israel, tied these developments directly to the contribution of the U.S. constitutional law. United States Supreme Court decision in particular have always been, to me and many other judges in modern democracy, shining examples of constitutional thought. The constitutional action. The U.S. is the richest, deepest source of the constitutional in general, of judicial review in particular. We foreign journalists all look to developments in the U.S. as inspiration. The U.S. can export legal ideas and structures abroad. Organized interactions between national judiciaries are both stronger and broader than ever before. Judges themselves believe that they are engaged in a translation judicial enterprise that is not limited to the laws enacted by their local domestic governments. Constitutional courts will be bring a deeply pluralist, contextualized understanding of human rights law as it spans countries, cultures, and national and international institutions. Advantage 1, innocence. Continue to say the death penalty leads to death of innocent people. Tribe, 2017. Too many condemned people are innocent. In modern era, the death penalty of 160 people have been extradited and freed from death row because of evidence found that they were wrongly convicted. A painstaking study from the National Academy of Science concluded that 4 out of every 100 people sentenced to death in the U.S. are innocent. Even 1 in 1,000 would be unacceptable. The court should acknowledge that capital punishment violates human dignity and constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Even the risk of killing innocent people is intolerable and must be rejected. Berry, 2019. Killing an innocent person obviously serves no compelling state interest. It is murder. The execution of a legally and factually innocent person would be an intolerable event. The substantial risk of executing a legally and factually innocent person is intolerable. Execution under the Federal Death Penalty Act of foreseeable state-sponsored murder is of innocent human beings. We should have zero tolerance when the life is on the line, and justifies the means approach only justifies more violence. Mams 2018. The death penalty also creates problem domestically. More than two-thirds of America's death sentences are overturned on appeal. We should have zero tolerance for mistakes when someone's life is on the line. The government becomes a lawbreaker and it breeds contempt for law. To declare that in the administration of the criminal law, the ends justify the means. To declare that the government may commit crimes in order to secure the conviction of a private criminal would bring terrible retribution. Finally, the government has become a role model. It sends a message that violence is in the province of the powerful. America should not consider studies showing the homicide rates increase where the death penalty is used and decrease where it is not. Therefore, in our attempts to prevent crime with capital punishment, we are in fact encouraging it. Advantage 2, international human rights. The U.S. stance on the death penalty undermines the willingness of other nations to respect human rights. Minutes 2018. The U.S. claims to be a global leader in the international human rights, but it continues to impose the death penalty and criticizes other countries for violating international human rights. The U.S. death penalty system also allows racial disparities and executes the mentally ill. The U.S. also permits ineffective assistance to counsel. What this country does with respect to the death penalty affects the attitudes of other countries towards the U.S., as well as their willingness to respect human rights. Banning the death penalty is crucial to U.S. credibility on human rights law. Mims 2018. The death penalty is a form of punishment in the U.S. may play a significant role in terminating the cordial relations in the future. With countries that have abolished the death penalty, the U.S. also opens itself to condemnation from other countries whose laws are consistent with the international human rights standards. When we tell the world that we expect all people to abide by our laws, we cannot say in the same breath that we violate the right to life, harms relations in other countries. Spain announced that it would not extradite Algerian terrorist suspects if the death penalty would be sought. England, America's principal ally, also declared that if it captured bin Laden, it would not extradite him to the U.S. if the death penalty would be sought. The U.S. cannot lecture other countries on the rule of law and importance of respecting international human rights if it will not abide by those laws and rights itself, especially those laws protecting the right to life. U.S. support for human rights prevents large-scale conflict. Green 2017. The U.S. has benefited immensely from the liberal world order that it helped create. The ashes of the World War II, America invested in an interlocking institution based on universal human rights that would prevent large-scale conflict. U.S. support for human rights matters in people's lives. There is no other country that can substitute for the U.S. when it comes to fighting for universal freedoms. The solidarity expressed by the U.S. political leaders. That's all the time I have. I now stand open for cross-examination.
All right, I will time cross-sex. You have 3 minutes, and it begins now.
Could you evaluate on your first argument again, please?
Our advantage on innocence.
Yes.
So our advantage on innocence is pretty much saying that if we ban the death penalty in the U.S., we wouldn't run the slightest risk of killing an innocent American, which is extremely important because that can factor into how other countries view our country and its political views and what we value. And if we say that it's okay to murder innocent people, then we are not doing our job as a nation, and therefore we need to abolish the death penalty to make sure that we do not run the slightest risk of that happening.
Okay, could you evaluate your second argument?
Our second is international human rights, and this extends to foreign people that are handed over to America that might be prosecuted by death penalty, and overall that is impacting our relations with other countries, some of our closest allies even, and if we don't have those allies, if we go into a war or something, we could be losing are very important allies, which would ultimately lead to more American deaths and would be traumatic for the US. So by banning the death penalty, it's taking the step to further our views of international human rights and strengthening our relations with other countries.
Would you like to end cross-ex there?
Sure.
All right. It is the 1NC next, so when you are ready, you may begin. And make sure to time yourself, please.
It's me.
Yeah, I believe you are the 1NC.
Wait, how much time do I have? 8 minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Just tell me when you're going to begin and then start.
All right, I'll begin now. Turn. The death penalty saves more innocent lives via deterrence. Lenten 2017. The publication of a number of important works in econometry, according to which there is evidence that the death penalty may have a clear deterrent effect. The recent empirical studies, which use sophisticated econometric methods, claim that capital punishment has a strong deterrent effect against violent crimes. Each execution saves 18 innocent lives. This shows that removing the death penalty would actually end more innocent lives than keeping it. Moving on to my second card. Turn. Aggressively promoting human rights leads to conflict. Walt 2017. Advancing human rights in different parts of the world is not necessarily the best way to produce peace. When the US overthrew Gaddafi largely for human rights reasons in Libya, we ended up creating a failed state and the situation, even worse than it was before we intervened. So, well-intentioned efforts to advance human rights don't necessarily create a more peaceful world. We have to be very careful about overzealous efforts because that actually can be an engine for conflict. This is something that you cannot rush. You have to let each society come to those conclusions pretty much on its own. This shows that intervening with other countries' human rights actually leads to more problems.
Has it been 8 minutes?
Almost. All right, it's been 8 minutes.
All right. It is cross-X now. I will time. When you are beginning to just begin your cross-X and I'll start timing.
All right. So what do you mean by removing the death penalty would cause more deaths?
When a criminal leaves the prison not dead, he can kill more people than then how many innocent lives are saved then how many innocent lives, like how many innocent people die in the death penalty.
Okay. Do you have any examples of that?
I just want to remind you this is tag team, so Parker, you can jump in if you want.
Right.
You don't have to. I'm just saying.
All right.
I have a question based on what Lucas just said. So the alternative for death row is life in prison. So that would technically mean that they would not be able to go out and murder other people. So basically what I'm asking is, are you referring to criminals who have not already been convicted of murder when you say that they would be the ones going out and killing more people?
I am talking about people who get released from prison without death penalty.
Can you elaborate on your statement that advancing human rights does not help lead peace?
It has not helped lead peace in Libya, so it wouldn't in other countries either.
That is all I have.
I have no further questions.
All right, cross-X is over. We have more than 10 minutes left in this Zoom, so we're going to move on to the 2AC.
Is everyone ready? And is everyone muted?
Yes.
All right. I'll be carrying on where my partner left off. There's no other country that can substitute for the U.S. when it comes to fighting for universal freedoms. The solidarity expressed by U.S. political leaders have provided substance and hope to human rights defenders in the grimmest conditions. The U.S. needs to make sure that those bravely fighting against repression and injustice all around the world know that they have not been forgotten. U.S. embrace of human rights is crucial to solving for human rights violations around the globe. Bellinger 18. It is precisely because such freedoms are not inevitable that America must play an active role in protecting and advancing them. This requires their vigorous promotion, the U.S. as an actor as well as an exemplar. Embracing the cause of basic rights and freedoms gives purpose and direction to America's role in the world. Standing up for fundamental rights makes the world safer for Americans and makes us stronger. Governments that respect the rights of their citizens remain the best vehicle for prosperity and peace. America is respected around the world for its commitment to human rights and the rule of law. To resist growing restrictions on freedom in the world, the U.S. leadership is necessary to reverse this trend. A fulsome embrace of human rights would demonstrate to all countries nobility of purpose at a time when confidence in the US is shaky. Okay. Banning death penalty is crucial to US credibility on international law. The US cannot expect to be respected in the international community if it does not start playing by the rules and that apply to other countries, especially the rules that it has agreed to play by. Because the US prides itself on being a nation of laws, it should abide by the international laws limiting the use of the death penalty, just like it expects other nations to abide by the other human rights norms. As a global superpower, the US should lead by example, showing respect for all human rights, especially the right to life for all persons. If our country truly supports the idea that the right to life is universal, then it must abolish the death penalty. If not, it could find itself increasingly isolated in the future. International law is crucial for human survival. Robinson, 2018. Violations of international law need to be taken seriously is that international law is very recent and very fragile. If one of them betrays the others, the whole tentative cooperative system instantly collapses. In the 21st century, international relations, this could mean utter catastrophe. The great powers have to get along because their mutual possession of nuclear arms means that the stakes of conflict is incalculably high. A functioning cooperative pact that holds each of them to a set of humane principles is essential. Procedure is substance to a certain degree because when the world adopts a process that achieves consensus, there's peace. And when it doesn't, there isn't. Spat upon the international community's processes endangers us all because it slowly erodes the weak bonds that keep the world from collapsing into war. A U.S. recommitment to international law solves global warming and terrorism. Hathaway, 2007. It is time to rebuild America's historical commitment to international law. The case for international law as a cornerstone of American policy should begin with a more basic message. Only through a robust engagement with international law can the U.S. promote its national interests in a modern and globalized world. That international law is frequently the simplest and most effective and least expensive solution to problems big and small. International law, many of the thorniest problems we face. Global problems. International law can also help us solve many of the thorniest problems we face. Global problems require global solutions. There are many problems we cannot solve ourselves, and the obvious example is global warming. No country can combat the problem alone. A less obvious example is terrorism. No state can effectively fight terrorism in isolation. Only by working together can states effectively combat this transnational threat. By working constructively to improve and expand international law, the U.S. can project its interests and values abroad without the use of force. The next administration should take a cue from the American people and return the U.S. to a position of leadership in international law. Restoring the Americans' proper place in international law is warming. There is no substance is in the best interest of our nation, whether the issue of terrorism or global warming. There is no substitute for American leadership in the support for international law, and no substitute for international law in the support of American leadership. Global warming risks human extinction. 19. Ahmed, 19. A harrowing scenario analysis of how human civilization might collapse in coming decades due to climate change has been endorsed by the former Australian defense chief and senior Royal Navy commander. Climate change is a near to midterm existential threat to human civilizations. The paper argues that the potentially extreme outcomes of climate-related security threats are often far more probable than conventionally assumed. On our current trajectory, the report warns that planetary and human systems are reaching a point of no return by mid-century in which the prospect of a largely uninhabitable Earth. Terrorism leads to war. Hayes, 18. The multiple types and scales of nuclear terrorism may affect state nuclear use decisions along multiple pathways that lead to inadvertent nuclear war. Early warnings systems fail as are tripped in ways that lead to launch on warning, accidental nuclear detonation, strategic miscalculation, and crisis decision-making failure. A non-state actor's nuclear attack and a catastrophic interstate nuclear exchange are not necessarily separable. It is just possible that some sort of terrorist attack, and especially an attack on nuclear terrorism, could precipitate a chain of events leading to a massive nuclear weapons between two or more states that possess them. Advantage 3, soft power. Banning the death penalty is necessary to the U.S. and world. MIMS 18. Even though the United States claims to be the world leader in international human rights, it continues to impose the death penalty. The U.S. routinely criticizes other countries for violating international human rights. For example, it criticized some of its closest allies for failing to prevent trafficking of women and children. Likewise, America has cautioned China to abide by the international norms of behavior regarding human rights violations. The U.S. has placed pressure on countries with poor human rights records, though America's commendation of other countries is hypocritical because it violates the same norms through its use of the death penalty. There are consequences that come with a contradictory policy on human rights. For instance, in the aftermath of September 11th, European countries acknowledged their unwillingness to extradite terror suspects to the U.S. if their punishment involves the death penalty. Ignoring international law and customary norms could create severe political and social consequences for the U.S. This country needs to think globally. With respect to the death penalty, the U.S. should respect its
That is time.
Okay.
If we are going to fit cross-ex into this Zoom, we need to start right now. So 3, 2, 1, begin.
Could you elaborate on your third advantage?
Soft power?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So if the U.S. criticizes other countries for, say, killing or other human right violations, then we proceed to do the same thing with the death penalty. Then we cannot judge other people and be a leading example in the world.
Do you have any other questions?
Could you elaborate on your second point a little more, please?
Yes. My second advantage or my second point?
You're on mute, Parker.
Second advantage, sorry.
Okay. So if the death penalty, international human rights. So if we impose the death penalty, then say Europe, as seen before, they would not give Osama bin Laden to us because we imposed it, and we would have given him if they caught. We would have sentenced him to the death penalty if we caught him, and if we keep imposing these things, then we won't receive help from other nations, some of our closest allies as well.
All right, thank you.
That concludes cross-ex. I will stop recording in 3, 2.